Let me take over. So thank you very much for joining the session about the Apex internal workspace. So Dino already introduced me. My name is Elias Mali. I'm actually coming from Europe, from Slovenia. It's like a central part of Europe. I would like to thank you, the Australian Oracle user group, for inviting me, and thank Lino for organizing this webinar series. Great to be back. About me, I'm the Oracle Ace Associate. I work for the company Abacus Plus as an IT solution architect, but I call it I'm a developer, basically, regardless of the title. I do some work, also a lot of work for the Slovenian Oracle user group. I'm there for vice president, and I'm in the organizing committee for a new conference we call it Make It. It's gonna happen in mid of October. I'm also the co-organizer of the Apex API conference. So we had the first conference this year. It was in Austria, Graz. Next year it's going to be also in April. It's going to be in Croatia, Zagreb, and we are happy that we can already announce that Mike Hitchcock will be our keynote speaker. Back in 2006, I was Apex Board Member of the Month for March for my open source Apex text messages project. Okay, but my company, we are based in Slovenia. Basically, what we do is basically all about Oracle, and yes, we have a nice team of Apex developers, and yeah, you can say we are all in for Apex. Okay, that's the introduction part, and now we will just switch to the topic. But before we start talking about the internal workspace, let's just refresh on what the workspace is. So basically, my assumption is that basically you are quite familiar with the term workspace, but nevertheless, like by definition, a workspace is a virtual private database allowing multiple users to work within the same Oracle Application Express installation while keeping their objects, data, and applications private. This is actually an old picture, but I kind of like it still. It's quite describes the workspaces quite well. So with the workspaces, we have here like Department 1, Department 2, and Department 3 are building different applications, and they can log into Workspace 1, 2, and 3. This workspace has like really simplified two basic intentions. So on one side, it's also isolating the applications. For example, ABC and they have nothing in common. And on the other side, it's providing access to the database schema. In this case, it's schema 1. One workspace can actually have access to multiple database schemas. Okay, since we are talking about workspaces, let's also address a bit roles. Like if we are building applications, we know hopefully, or we are building applications for our end users, and they are actually using the existing applications, right? The next role that we have, it's actually are we, the developers. We are the creating and editing applications, and we are doing this by logging to a particular workspace, like for example, HR or CRM workspace, and then we build the applications. Inside of the application, we also know one specific role, which is called the Workspace Administrator. And the Workspace Administrator is actually responsible for administration tasks for a specific workspace. That means he can create additional users, he can request, I don't know, more space quota and stuff like this. He can do some monitoring. He can allow like certain things like privileges and so on. Then we also know a special role, which is called the instance administrator. Instance administrator are actually a super users that manage an entire hosted Oracle Application Express instance, which may contain multiple workspaces. So we have already addressed that on one database, we can have more workspaces, and the instance administrator is, among others, also responsible for managing all those workspaces. With the instance administrator, it's actually how does an instance administrator manages Apex instance. It's actually by logging to the internal workspace, or more appropriate, or I would say the more formal definition would be that he is using Oracle Application Express Administration Services application. What does that mean? Like, he has to connect to an application which is available at the end of the Apex_admin, right? So this is exactly this screen here. Okay. But now we can just say, wait. Now we're talking about administration services, but like, what's the administration services and what's the internal workspace then? Well, it's basically the same thing. Like, we can log in to the internal workspace via this screen, and it's called administration services. Or we can actually go like our normal login that we are used to it, and we will just put in the internal as our workspace. But okay, first things first. What do we do? What do we need to log into internal workspace? We need a username and we need a password. How do we get a password? Yeah, well, it depends on our role. Sometimes we are the DBAs and developers and everything. But basically, at the end of the database of the Apex installation on the database, the DBA has to run a script called APX chpvd, and this script will create administrator user. By default, the name will be admin, but we can also create like different names. What we have to put in is actually an email and the password. The same script we use if we forget our password, and this is how we actually reset the password. Okay, once we have the URL, once we have the setup, once we have the username and password, we can basically log into Oracle Application Express Administration Services, or so-called internal workspace. Okay, and let's just do that. I will use this screen. Okay. I will make a mistake here. So I will just say assigning to, yeah? And then you see I have here an error. This is a well-known error. And if I'm making more mistakes, like, it will just take me more and more time to log in, and finally it will also block my logging attempts. Why I'm addressing this, we will come to this. Hopefully now I'll use the right password. Okay, so now I'm actually logged into my instance administration or internal workspace. Now I would like to do some things. So what do I do here? So what can I do here? Yeah, basically I can do a lot of things. And actually, like, when I was preparing for this presentation, it's always like this: you get an idea what you will talk about, then you always worry about, will there be enough for 45 or 60 minutes, like, to cover only the internal workspace? But like, it's way more than just 60 minutes. So yeah, I had to like, I had like more to cover, but basically you cannot fit everything into 60 minutes regarding the internal administration. So the way I'm doing this presentation, I will address the things that I see are more interesting, and also maybe the things that I think they are a bit overlooked, and a few things that are important, like due to the security reasons. So what do we normally do, or what do I normally do when I do a fresh installation of Apex, like in the first few minutes? As first thing, we already said we would create an admin user. Then I just go through this list. I will check for some settings, and I will set up some messages. I will review the security. Then I would create a workspace and the user, and off we go. So this is like the minimum what we could do, and this is sadly also, like, in many cases, the only thing that I see like some people are doing. Okay, at the login, so the first thing what you are maybe tempting to do is actually, you saw when I was trying to log to the when I was trying to log into the internal workspace, there was this message when I made a mistake with the password. I had to wait for 5 seconds, for 10 seconds, and then 15 and 30 seconds, and so on and so on. So you might get annoyed with that, and then you say, you know what, I will just go here under the security, and I will just go a bit down, and there is a setting here under the general setting. I can change the delay after failed login attempts in seconds to 0. Okay, then I feel already better, because now I will not be bugged with this thing. But nevertheless, I will leave it on 5 seconds. And the second thing that I always do is, like, I will scroll down here and I will review the password policy. I think, like, by default, these settings are a bit too low. Like, for example, there is no limitation on the password length. I think like we should change this at least like this. Like the password differences, maybe to do it on 4. Then like maybe we would like to say at least one alphabetic character, at least one numeric character, and so on and so on. So I think it's really meaningful that we change this setting. And one thing also to note, like there is a different policy by default that's it's being applied to when we log into the, in brackets, normal workspaces, or to the internal one. So for the internal one, by default, Apex is requesting the strong password policies for the admin user, and that means a lot of things that I just set up already applies for the internal instance. But we can be lazy and say, you know what, we will just switch this here, and we don't care about password. Regarding the passwords and disabling all these features, like if you browse for the on the internet for some sites like password checker, those sites will tell you how much time it takes to crack your weak password. So for example, if I would have a password Oracle, it would take a standard desktop PC with a brute force attack about 3 seconds. Like you see, like a fast desktop PC, it would take 1 second, and don't even mention other things. But if we like change this to, there are some example, maybe if we take something totally random, okay, so that will take a lot more time. So the thing is, like, by ignoring the security settings for a password, or by excluding the failed login attempts in seconds and so on, basically we are digging our own graves. So first thing that you do, just go here and change those settings. Okay, I'm on the local host, so that's fine. The next thing that I also do is I go under the feature configuration and I review actually those two settings here. So create demo objects in new workspaces and create worksheet objects in new workspaces. I think this is changing from release to release, and now the default is no. And what does this setting do? Basically, when you create a new workspace, if this settings are to yes, it would create some demo tables, some packages, and so on. And like if you have a real development of this environment, or even production environment, I think you don't want to have these demo objects in your database schemas, right? But there is a way, if you want to have demo objects, it's actually a way nicer way. And this is actually then more of for a role of a workspace administrator, not as an Apex instance administrator. So just for a particular workspace administrator. One thing that I also check, I go to the REST section. And if I check if I have enabled RESTful services, and normally I set this one to yes, but it's like up to you. One thing, like we need this parameter if we want to use the static application file support with boards. And what's also interesting, and I think this is new to 18.1, so there is a new parameter called Swagger UI URL. And this is like if you're working with the REST services, this is a really cool thing. And I will show you. So let me just, so this was the part of the feature configuration. Like, of course, we can go through other stuff, like what do we allow with the packaged application? What are the limitations with the SQL workshops? Do we allow database monitoring? And do we enable service requests? I will show this if we will have time at the end. So there are a lot of settings, but as already said, we will not address each of and one of them. Otherwise, this would be quite boring, I guess, and a really long presentation. Okay, the last thing that I also do before I start creating the workspaces, I also like define the login message. This is under manage instance. So the login message, this is my local instance. This is how I know that I'm logged into, let's say, that I'm logging to the development system or the production system. Then I can also define the system message. System message is actually visible when we log into the internal workspace or to the normal workspace. So again, here you could also define like a message, watch out, this is the production environment. And the last thing that you can also do, like you can manage site-specific tasks. Basically, this is you define your custom links. Like for example, you can define links to your internal documentation or to apex.works. This is actually already included, or to, I don't know, to oracle.com or something like this. And you can specify where you want to display these links, either on the workspace login or in the workspace itself. Okay, let's just quickly jump to one already existing workspace that I created before. So I have a tablespace alias with a username alias, a password alias, which is totally against what I just explained. But yes, it's a local host, it's a demo. So so as you can see on the login screen for the workspace, I see this is my local instance. So I know already on the login screen where I'm logging into, where I want to log into. Under site-specific task, I have also defined some links. And for example, this is your entry point to the Apex world. Like this is pointing to the apex.world. Okay. After I sign in, as you can see, I have a system message. Let's make this a good day. And this could also be like, watch out, this is a production environment, or hey, relax, this is a local instance. What I haven't shown is actually that per each workspace, you can also define your own custom messages, right? If you go to edit workspaces, then you have a section for our workspace message, and you can also define one message here. And I also defined another site-specific tasks. Here on the right side, I have a link to the Apex RP Adria conference. Like I want to publish as many conferences and promote as many conferences as possible. Yeah, regarding the demo objects. So there is no need to enable that feature in the internal workspace, because we can just go to the SQL workshop, and under utilities, we have a simple data set now. Right? In the sample data set, we can basically install some sample tables and so on. So we have the project data, we have the most known apt tables, HR data, and so on. So we can just click on it, and then we install this in just one particular workspace. And this is already like a task for a workspace administrator. If you remember, like a few minutes ago, I mentioned Swagger URL, and I have here I have already enabled the REST services, and this is the sample what you can. So we have a sample services here. So if I go to one module, for example, and if I have defined the Swagger URL, then here is one button. You know, on the left side, we see like we have this module, and this module has like the this and this and this and this and like different methods and so on. And then you want to tell your, I don't know, developers or external developers which they would use the and the REST services, what are the endpoints, how to use them, and so on. And like Auth now, it's integrated with the Swagger. And if you click on this, you will be redirected to the URL that you specified. And this will actually generate a documentation on your web services. And for example, you see here, like you have a put method, you click on it, and then you see, this is how I would use it, right? Or for example, you can actually click on the employees and you say, you know, I will try it out, and you execute it, and then you get back actually the results, and you also see how to call it from via URL or with a CURL. So this is really helpful, and it's not like you just have to put one single attribute in and you really get something out of it. Okay, so that was one thing. Yeah, basically, we covered most of the things that I normally do in the first few minutes, unless we forgot one. Well, we didn't forgot. We just didn't know. We are just not there yet. Yeah, what's the most basic thing that we will do after the first few minutes? Yeah, we will create a new workspace actually. So we can create a new workspace under the Manage Workspaces. And here we go, like we have an option to create a workspace. It's fairly easy to create a workspace. I will just put in the name, and then we come to what I think is a really important thing. It's actually a workspace ID. We will come to the workspace ID in a few minutes, but recommendation, and please, it's really a good recommendation. So for example, if we have a development, test, and production system, on all those three systems, we will have, for example, the same workspace name. Let's call it CRM, right? And the recommendation is that on all those three databases, we use the same workspace ID, because this will help us later when we will do the deployment and so on. For example, if we will do the export import of the applications from development to test, like with the UI, with the GUI, that's runs okay. But if we want to use scripts and if we have like a different workspace IDs, we will have some issues. And also, like for example, if you want to just export a single page and import it to a test environment, then again we have some issues that we have to take care of if the workspace IDs are different. Okay, we have also here the really nice option. It's called the Create Multiple Workspaces. And this is really useful if we need to set up, let's say, a workshop for 10, 20, 30 attendees. And basically here we have different ways how we would generate those workspaces. But if we have a mailing list of the attendees, we can just copy paste here the all the emails, and then it will generate as many workspaces as we have also the emails. We can also say, you know what, just generate me 30 workspaces, and the prefix is going to be like this. We can also define here for this 30 workspaces, install sample application, install sample web sheet. Maybe we'll do this like this. Install empt tab tables, how the space quota, we can define the space quota, because in the background it will create table spaces also. We can also specify resource manager consumer group, and we can also define if we want to allow the automatically purging of these workspaces. So we can define when this happens, but basically if no one will use the workspace for a really long time, then the workspace will be purged. And this is actually the same as you see if you have a workspace on the apex.oracle.com, and then time to time you will get an email if you do a thing like your workspace will be deleted. Okay, but let's just go back to a single one. And I would just say here create, and then now I have the possibility to say, you know what, do you want to reuse the existing schema, or do you want to create a new schema? So if you will create a new schema, what I would actually recommend is that at the end, basically just run some scripts that you see what was actually generated. But I will here create like this. So I will just pick this schema, and what I see really nice, what I find really nice, like Apex is saying to me, like if you will build an Apex applications, you should consider granting these privileges to this user. It will make maybe your life a bit easier. After that, you can also create some username. You have to specify an email. And what is really important to know here, so basically we are creating a workspace called new VS3, and it will have access to schema shopping. I will create that workspace, and then I can go to the edit workspace. I can change some things, like for example, workspace message. We already mentioned that. How is it with the account expiration? Do we allow to use the app builder? Maybe we just created a workspace where we will be able to use nothing else than, for example, team development. So that would be like the setup for that. Okay, after we are done, like we have the list of the workspaces. That's under the manage workspaces and existing workspaces. Like for example, if we choose, if we pick this one, can go to edit. And what's also really useful, if we go to workspace database privileges, and again we pick here one workspace, then we get a lot more information. How is it like? We get a workspace ID. We get what's allowed. We see which schemas are connected to this workspace. Like then we see the database applications, how many pages do we have a web sheet applications, how is it with the package application, and so on, so on. So this is really a nice overview. Yeah, and what we can also do here, for example, we can add another user to this workspace. But this is again, I think, like we are now on the limit. Should this be the work of the instance administrator or already a workspace administrator? Okay. Yeah. There's one thing also to mention. So under the Manage Workspaces, we have here a section called Manage Workspace to Schema Assignments. So this is exactly what we were actually talking about at the beginning with this like picture. Here we see that, for example, our workspace, new workspace 3, has a schema. The only thing that he has assigned is schema alias. So maybe I did this wrong and I can change this to something else, or I can actually say also I would like to add another schema. Again, I can add a new schema or existing schema. We will just pick this one. And then select, let's say, this one. And this is how we map additional schema to our workspace. And then the Apex, with this workspace, we have access to two database schemas. One thing to mention, like we can also create workspace manually with an Apex instance admin package. This is quite well documented, but we will come to this package a bit later. So we already talked about this thing. And yes, and this is really interesting thing. So how does Apex actually access the database schemas? So if you will go and if you will search for grants, you will see that when we make workspace to schema assignments, there are no grants like grant select on this table and grant select tables that are, so there are no grants, like there are no new grants. So I would really recommend that you read this blog from Denis Sorenko. So he did some investigation of what's actually going on in the background. And it turned out like Apex is using the undocumented package dbms sysql, but this package it's like granted to nobody. But Apex is accessing this package through a broker package called www.dbms SQL Apex 18011 or 100 for version 18.1. So what this package does is actually you can execute whatever SQL statement you want, and you just add the parsing schema, and then it will run. And then like you can have like an idea, oh, this is really useful. It's not useful, it's dangerous, and don't even think about it, right? So this is just like from the technical perspective, how it's done in the background. And later, Conor McDonald did also a YouTube video on this topic. And it's again, don't even think about it. And I really like the quote from Denis Sorenko at the end of the blog post. And remember, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm not sure where this quote is coming from, but I like it a lot. And you know, then you can just argue like, oh, this is unsafe and so on and so on. But you know, if you have the possibility to grant execute on dbms sysql, then you have also the possibility to grant sysdba privilege. You have the possibility to grant a DBA role, maybe even DBA role to public. So it's all in your hands. So that's the design in the background. What you do with it, it's like you have the responsibility. Yeah, let's talk about a bit about this famous thing called Workspace ID. Under the Manage Workspaces, under the existing workspaces, like if I click on one workspace, every workspace has a unique workspace identifier. And my recommendation is that for if you have multiple environments, dev, test, prod, use the same workspace ID for the same workspace. This comes very handy when you are trying to deploy your applications via scripts. I have here, I will do some stuff with the SQL Plus. And for example, I have here a local Apex installation, but in our environment, we also have the development database in Abacus. And I have actually exported an application 500 from there. And it's from the workspace Igranica, that means in our language playground. And I have the same workspace Igranica also on my local installation. So if I do export and import, right? And because the workspace IDs, I did it like on purpose that they are completely the same. Like I can just easily do something like this. I will just go here and I will do import, and this import will go through as like really without any problems. Let me just log into this workspace. Okay, so before it was empty, now we have it here. You just trust me on this. Okay, now I will delete this application. And I also have another export from our development database. And this is actually the same 500 application, but this time it's from a different workspace. So the workspace on our development system and my local installation is different. If I want to do the same thing again, okay, I will just go here. I will run basically the same thing, but just a different, I took the different export file. So when I run this, like what will happen, the Oracle, so Apex will complain that the workspace IDs, they do not match. So what can we do? It's like, it's possible to do something. Yeah, it is possible to do something. Basically, it's really simple. Like we just have to go to our local instance on the target database, and we say, okay, we want to import it to Workspace Granica. What's my Workspace ID? I remember that Workspace ID, and then I set that Workspace ID. But that's not all. I have to do something else. So I have to generate an offset. What's the story behind the offset? Let me just explain like this. For example, we have our development system. This is, I call it a source database. And in there, I have Workspace Granica 1. There is some application. And on the page ID 1, I have an item P1 LOE with this internal item object ID, right? And then on the target database, I have a different workspace, completely different page, completely different application, but with some coincidence, there I have also an item. It's an edit box, it's a different functionality, but they have the same internal object ID or item ID. And if I do an export and import now, I will hit the unique constraint violation. And that's why I have to say, generate offset. So this generate offset is basically a big random number. And this is like added, for example, if I have in my source this value, then it will generate an offset. We will see the offset here, and it will just add, it will do a plus. It will do a plus, and then I have like a bigger value. I'm in a completely different range, and then I'm safe. Let us just see what's happening now. Okay, that's not good because I have to actually connect to the SQL Plus, right? Okay, so as you can see here, the offset is this value, and this offset will be added to the source IDs. And when I run this, and before that, I also set like the workspace ID, and it's like useful that you remember this value. You can calculate the value back, but I find it useful to remember it because later if I want to import just one page, I will need this. Okay, so now I have actually installed the application. And if I go here, you see this was empty. And if I refresh it, I have here again import. Let me just show you one thing. So under here, I have one list of values. What I did next, actually, on the development system, I made a change. On the page 1, I have added another. List of values. Now I would like to import only this page to my target to my target Apex. So what do I have to do in this case? So basically what I have to do now, I will do the same thing. I will just look up the workspace ID, and then I will search for, then I will read what was my offset, and then I do set workspace ID and set the same offset, right? And once I do this, the page should be successfully imported. Then again, here is the offset. Okay, let's go to the application. I'll just refresh that page. There is a new LOE item. And what would actually happen if I wouldn't use the same offset, or if I would forget, or if I would generate a new one? So let's try that one out. So now this is actually the same procedure, the same thing. The only thing here, this is the I commented this thing out. So let's see what will happen now. It will be quite an interesting effect. If I go back to the page designer, the whole page one is gone, because basically we are messing with the with the object IDs, with the page IDs, and they don't match. Like Apex is looking for something and it's not finding it. So like the recommendation here is everything is possible. But when you play around with this offset, you really have to understand what you're doing. But at the end of the day, just have the same workspace IDs and like don't even think about these things. Okay, but just for understanding things. And maybe I can also show another thing. Like for example, here I have a procedure where I'm importing the same 500 application into my target database. But I'm just doing this under the ID 501 and then later under 502. And in this case, I will not generate any offset. So here I was lucky enough that I hadn't hit any collisions. That went good. And what happens now, if I run this again, so the same export file with the same IDs, I will get the unique constraint violation. So that's why I have to use the generate offset. Okay. As already said, there are a lot of things that we can control and so on. So we will not talk about all the things, but nevertheless, I would like to address some of the things that I find really useful and maybe a bit overlooked. One of those things is actually workspace isolation. Workspace isolation, that means that I will define that I can access my workspace only through a particular DNS alias. For example, if I have here, I can define that I have a workspace HR, and this workspace can be accessed only via hr.example.com, or for example, the workspace CRM, it can be only accessed through the crm.example.com. And let me just show you this in for real. So I have here this one. Manage workspaces, existing workspace. So I have here the workspace granica and workspace isolation. So I said, you know, I have the for all application in the workspace granica, they are accessible only via DNS alias polo.abacus.si. And let me show you the demo about it. So for example, like this is, sorry, yeah, I have to do one thing. Okay. See, now I can access the application, but if I want to access the same thing via another DNS alias, which is actually showing on the same Apex, I will get no data found. So yeah, that's the really cool cool feature. What's actually also important to know, to say, like this feature is, like I would recommend to use the workspace isolation feature together with the rejoin session. feature, with the rejoin session feature, actually you can log into the existing session without using the session ID, but you're actually exposing yourself to some security risks, like the same origin security policy can be an issue, cross-site scripting attacks, they can happen, and in combination with workspace isolation and the session rejoin, you can actually eliminate that issue. Now I will focus on some other security settings that I find really interesting. For example, under the security, what's also possible that we can say, you know what, disable administrator login. So we are not able to log into the internal workspace, or we are not able to log into the workspaces, like to any workspace. If I enable this, and if I want to log in again to Apex, it's going to be unauthorized access. And yes, of course, at this point, I can't even access the internal workspace. But lucky enough, I'm still here, I'm still logged in. And that's why I will just change the setting back. Otherwise, it would be a bit hard to show the rest of the demos. But if I still do the mistake, I have the possibility to use again the Apex instance admin package, and there I could like set this particular parameter back to no, and I would be up and running again. While we are already at this package, like everything that I'm showing today via GUI, it can be a lot of things that can be done also with this package. Like it's really well documented. And one of the things that's maybe interesting to know, like we have the set parameter and get parameter, what I just showed you. And there is also under the get parameter, there's a link to the available parameter values. And there you see what's possible to set via this API. One of the things actually, at least I haven't found how to set this thing via GUI. Web browser is a session cloning. So I consider this as part of the internal workspace or Apex instance administration. So if you want to enable session cloning, you have to use the Apex instance admin package by setting this parameter. If you want to know more about session cloning and also the reason behind why it's only possible to do it via API, you can read Joe's blog. But yeah, I would also like to say the session cloning is a really cool feature. We just implemented that with an existing customer, and they're like totally happy. So powerful feature. Another thing under the security, it's interesting, like you can say unhandled errors. Either you show the error page or you return the 400 HTTP response. So in this case, I will just use this setting. And if I would go, let's say, to a non-existing application, then you get back to bad request. But with the default setting, you get some more information back. And then it's like up to you. Would you like to expose this additional information or not? So in this case, it's not that critical, but I think this also comes up when you have an issue with the checksums and so on. And basically, it's just up to you, do I want to expose this or not? Yes, one really cool thing about, and we have to go back to the other instance, because this is available outside. Yeah, under the security, there is also a section called HTTP response headers, which the HTTP response header, basically we can set additional response headers which will make our application even safer. Yeah? There is a really good blog post, or not even a blog post, it's more like an article. You can read about hardening your HTTP response headers, but there is actually a website available where you can actually test, if you have a public website available, how good you are in this perspective, like when we talk about HTTP headers. Yep, so I have here our application, and if I test this thing, I will get back some results, and this is okay, and these are like marked with red, and yeah, it's not the best thing. So I will just go here, I will just click on help, I will copy paste this in, I will apply, and I will do a scan again. Just a second. So I think, yeah, now we get, I think we got just another green checkbox. So if I read a bit more about the documentation from this guy, I will basically come to settings like this. I will copy this in, and let me just check this again. Now it's way more green. Okay, but just one thing to note, like don't just blindly copy paste what I just did. Like don't use my presentation and copy paste it and say to yourself, oh, now we're way safer. Otherwise the Apex team would already do that. You have to review your application if that fits for you, because some settings, they might affect your application. So be a bit careful with the setting, but still good to know. Okay, let's talk briefly about the export-import capabilities. So when we are working with Apex, we have under the managed workspaces, we have the possibility to export a workspace. When we are exporting the workspace, basically we are just, in this particular case, we are exporting the definition of a workspace. So that means name of the workspace, workspace ID, the Apex users, the workspace to database schema assignments, and so on. So we are not exporting the application itself, we're just exporting the definition, because like if we don't have, when we start to develop, first we create a workspace in the development system, and when we move to the test system, right, first we have to recreate the workspace, then we can import the applications. Few things to know, like you have different possibilities, that you can also export the team development, and then you also have the export type, which can be a minimal or a full. What's the difference between a minimal and full? Like with full, you will also export SQL scripts, SQL comments, history, saved SQL, user preference, and so on and so on. And like I would say, like transferring all those things to the production environment, maybe that does not make sense. So this was like the possibility, yeah. And of course, later you can just go to the different environment and you click here import, and you will just do the import and install of the workspace. But you have also different possibilities. You can do the export via Apex Export Java utility, which is included if you unzip the Apex installation in the folder Apex Utilities, you will find it, and this is how you can use it. But nowadays, I guess the SQL CL utility makes life way easier. Basically, you can just connect to the SQL CL, and then you just say Apex export minus export workspace minus workspace ID, and you're good to go. Another possibility, it's also the Apex Export API package. In the Apex Export, there is a function called get workspace. You have the same possibilities, like would you like to export also the team development, and also like this minimal full. And if you use this this package, like you can use it in this way. The output is actually the Apex T export files table, and that's actually a collection of Apex the export file. And that collection actually consists from a name and a context. And if you get back this array, then you can also like do a really simple, you just do an insert, and when you query, get actually the whole SQL file. Okay, this is quite useful, I would say. Okay. Regarding the import, when you are doing the import of the workspace, it's not the application itself, but the workspace, like the workspace definition, you have to connect as the Apex internal database user, or as a sys or system, or any schema that has an Apex administrator role. So if you grant this role to any user, then this user can also do an import. Basically, you just run the file. And one thing to note, if the export file was created with a version of Apex lower than 3.2, then it's a must that you do it under this schema. One really good or cool thing about, you can also read about in the Joe's blog. He wrote the blog in August. I would guess that you know the blog, but I would still like to mention it. Like there, he's actually describing how you can script like everything from creating a table space to creating a user to creating a workspace to creating some tables and so on. So basically from scratch to everything. I would recommend you to read it, and this is actually those like export, import, but this is everything is included. One thing that's it's quite new and quite useful, like there are many possible, if you go to the monitor activity, you can see a lot of things. So you can see the top workspaces, top applications, and there are a lot of things that you can look at it. And what Apex team actually also did, so Apex is actually exposing some part of the in these activities and so on via REST services. So that means that basically you can get different information about your Apex instance environment through the REST and HTTP protocols, and this is really useful where you have a machine-to-machine communication, or where there is no SQLnet connections, for instance, in the cloud environments. It's fairly easy to configure. So under the manage instance, you just define the OAuth to client, and with the OAuth to client, you get the client ID and the client secret. Once you have this, basically, you can get a token back, for example, by calling Apex Web Services. And once you have the token, then you just call the different REST endpoints, which endpoints are possible to call. Like, for example, you can call some endpoints for fetch instant level statistics or application level statistics, and those are all defined here. So what do you have to call to get this information? And with the Apex version 18.1, it's also really easy to build application which is reading this information. So if you go to the application builder, here under the shell components for a particular application, you just define the web credentials, so the same OAuth that we just saw. And then you go back to the shared components and you define a web server module. And you take the REST endpoint from the documentation. Then you go to the page, for example, you create a classic report or interactive report, which is based on your web server's module. And as soon as you run this application for like this, you will get your data directly via REST. And then you can also do some reporting and so on and so on. So this is something I find useful. Okay, now we are slowly getting to the end of the presentation because we are running out of time. There are some more things included in this PowerPoint presentation. You can catch on this later, but I will just manage two things. log intervals. So there is a lot of logging is happening in the background. And we can actually configure a lot of things. Like, for example, one thing that we have to think about is actually log interval. Like, we have different types of logs. Like, we have the access log, activity log, debug messages, web service logs, and so on. And there is switching in the background. So basically, for every type of logs, there are two tables in the background. So similar approach as the video log files with a database. So Apex will write the log files to one table, and then after 14 days, it will switch to another one, and then it will truncate the first one because of the performance reasons, and then it will switch back to the first one. But that means basically that after like 14 or 28 days, your logs are gone, right? There is exception here. So the activity log, there is a scheduler job every night. The scheduler job will archive the activity log, but it's not going to be one-to-one backup. It's doing the summary, some rolling up, and so on. So you have like then like an overview what was happening. But if you would want to have really like if you would want to know what was happening, let's say 1 year ago, then I would suggest that you read this blog from Martin D'Souza. It's almost 10 years old, but it's still it's still the thing how to implement this the archiving. So basically, you would create your own tables, and then you create a nice scheduler which would actually do insert and select into your own tables. Then you have the whole history. So the reason why Apex is not doing this, why like you can do it up to 180 days, like it would be just too much, and because of all the dictionaries and so on, the Apex would run just slower and slower and slower. So this is the reason behind it. Okay, last thing that I will mention are the managed shared components. Managed shared components are actually here in the managed instance. What we can actually do under the packaged applications, we can do an export of our application which we did like develop, and then we go here, we say create, and here we just import the same application, and then our application will be available in the normal workspace as a packaged application which we can install. This is really nice. And another thing that's also interesting, but I think it's now being de facto used something else, so the public themes. So for example, I have here in my application, in some, like I had one application, and there I used the universal theme. I used some custom CSS, some colors, and so on. And then what I did, what I can do, actually, I can create a public theme. So I would just say, you know what, go to this workspace, to this application, use this theme that I just customized, and make it as a public theme. Then it's possible for me when I create a new application that I don't use the universal theme, but I use my theme, right? Or I can switch to my theme. The downside of using this feature is actually that once this is copied or once it is created in the internal workspace, you cannot change. You cannot change it. So, for example, if you do a migration from 5.1 to 18.1, and if you want to go to the new universal theme, basically you have to create a new public theme and then switch all your existing themes to applications to a new theme. So there is no such thing as a subscription, and this is where I think that most of the time we use this concept of master application, and then we have subscriptions. I will just quickly scroll what's still to mention. Like, we have the possibility to manage metadata like the session state, the mail queues, the interactive report subscriptions. Like, we can review what are the translations that we installed. Like, Apex can be deployed in 10 different languages, I think. And like, I normally only deploy the English one, and later if I want to deploy the German one, I can deploy another translation. I can monitor activity. These are the lists of the DBMS scheduler jobs, which are running in the background. You can read it on it later. And the last thing that I will just show is like I really like the service request. You can enable service request per workspace. And what this does is actually, if you are in your workspace and if you are an administrator, you can go here and then you say, you know, I would like to make a service request. And what's that request? So, you know, I need more space in my workspace. So I need 500 megabytes, okay? When I do this, I say request storage. And when the Apex instance administrator logs back to the internal workspace, so that's here, under the manage request, he sees all my requests. Basically, this was just, and then I click on it, and I can like deny request. I can just click on add space. So this is the communication between the workspace administrator and the Apex instance administrator. Really, the last thing, like if you know the sign up wizard, when you want to sign up for a new workspace at apex.oracle.com, the same thing is also possible to use in your own environment, and it's under manage instance. You just say manage new service sign up wizard, and you define like, do we require a justification, enable agreement text, some questions, and pre-text, post-text, and you can use the same functionality. And once you do this, if you sign out, sign in, there is a new link called request a workspace. Okay, that was it from my side. Hope I wasn't too long, but I think we are just on time. If we add the introduction from Lino.
No,
he already mentioned that I can blame him anyway.
Yeah. We had 3 questions from Jürgen. Thanks, Jürgen, for that one. He wants to pick up on what's the difference between workspace and message.
So I didn't hear you.
Guys, my phones are going mad. So what's the difference between workspace and system message?
Actually, system message is actually for all workspaces. Like you define a system message. This is the production system, and you see this message after you log into the to Apex. And the workspace message basically define the workspace message per workspace. For example, if I show this, if I log into, I think it's here, you see this is actually this is a message for workspace alias, for example, and this is the message that you will see in all workspaces. So this is like a global message, and the second one is actually per workspace.
All good. I mean, makes sense to me. Jürgen, hopefully that's enough. Another one was from Tony. So when you were talking about the export of the offsets on workspaces, and when you import the apps and stuff, so the comment is, why can't you from internal export your workspace from dev and then import it into test? You keep the same workspace between environments. Then you don't need to worry about workspaces when importing pages.
Yeah, that's totally true, and it is something that I mentioned. Like, if you have the possibility, do exactly that. So just keep the same workspace IDs, and you're safe. But it can happen that you cannot have everything in your hands, and if that's the case, then like you have to fiddle around.
Perfect. The last one was, can the export workspace be used to export workspace themes as well?
I think that you can export a theme like a theme. So if you go to here, for example, if you have one application here, you can go to export import, and here you can select what you will actually, I think, so you can go here under Teams, and then here you will actually export the theme, right? So this has more to do with the application itself and not the workspace itself. So the theme exports, it's one level lower. So you have the workspace export, then you have an application export, which can include the theme, which normally includes the theme export. And then you can also export the theme as a theme, right?
Perfect.
So, yeah.
So I don't have any other questions, and I think we're slightly over time, but that's all good. Thank you so much for being with us today. I highly appreciate it. And for everybody else, just in case if you missed any part of the webinars, I'm hoping that you know now in a day or so, I'm going to make it available for you just so you can view recording in case you missed anything. Hopefully, so outlook/apex webinars, if you see it here, it'll be all good. Other than that, next session is on next Tuesday, so same time, same Tuesday. I'm hoping to see you there, and pretty much that's all from me. Thank you so much also for hosting us, and thank you all for being with us today. Appreciate it. And for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Have a nice day. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, with pleasure.